setup is an incredibly personal choice. Everyone's different shapes, different sizes, and has different preferences. But getting that bike dialed in so it's really comfy and really suits you as best as it can is very, very important. Now, XC racers, they can take this to a whole nother level, putting in hundreds, if not thousands of miles at a time. And whether that's big epics or out racing, they really want to eke out every bit of power and comfort and efficiency from that bike as possible. And that's exactly what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at how to set up your XC bike from the front all the way to the back. Right, and like I said, we're going to start at the front of the bike and at the top, and its grips, one of the major contact points of the bike. But still so much choice here. Now you've got length, width and density of the grip, but which is best for cross country and maybe which is best for you? Try to tailor the grip you choose to your hand a little bit. Now for me, I have fairly large palms, so I prefer a much thicker grip. That way when I'm holding on, my palm or my fingers don't overlap into the palm of my hand. I find it more comfortable that way. I don't grip as tight, and this in turn means less arm pump over time as well, which is like a trifecta of good things. Next up, it's compound. Now there's two main ones to choose from here. You've got rubber or foam. For me, on my full sus bike here, I've got a rubber lock-on grip. I find them comfy on this bike. I don't mind that little bit of weight penalty. If you're a real weight weenie, the lock-ons are going to be a little bit heavier. And I know in those wet conditions, because I ride this bike a lot in the winter, that grip ain't going anywhere. On my hardtail, however, it's a different story because that thing is an absolute race whippet. The foam grips, well, obviously they save a few grams, so that makes that thing as light as possible. But the grips themselves, I find, are actually a little bit comfier in that scenario. Now, my hardtail's got a one-piece carbon bar and stem, so you do feel a lot of the small vibrations coming up through the bike, and those foam grips, well, they help eliminate that. They're actually a little bit thicker than my rubber grips here as well, so they do fit my hand nicely, so just making the ride that little bit more comfortable. Stem length and drop can change hugely from person to person, but here's a few tips to help you try and decide which stem length might be best for you and how to set it up. If you're anything like me and you've watched the World Cup XC on the telly, then you've probably noticed these really long, absolutely slammed negative rise stems on all the pros' bikes. Now they do this to try and get their weight as far over the front as possible to really help when they're climbing, get the power down and put them in the most efficient position possible. But that's not really going to work for a lot of us. For a lot of us, riding a stem like that, well, it'd probably mean a trip to the chiropractor. So when you're thinking about swapping out that stem for something maybe a bit longer, when you're having a go, try and think of how the bike handles when it climbs and in technical terrain. If you find the front end is a bit skittish and it's getting light, especially when you're climbing because your weights are really far back, well, before you swap out that stem of yours, try and think about possibly swapping the spaces around. So spaces that are underneath the stem, put on top, drop the front end a little bit lower. That's going to move your body weight a little bit more over the front end and hopefully give you that front wheel traction. If that's not working, then a longer stem could pull you forwards and sort of put your weight over the front end more as well. But be warned, if you do that, it's going to stretch your body out. So rather than sort of just tilting down like that, you're going to be tilting a little bit further forwards. Have a little play around and a bit of an experiment. By the end of the day, once you think you've got your setup dialed in, you really should be able to ride your bike for a long time or pretty intensely at a race comfortably. You shouldn't be in pain at the end of it, and your bike definitely shouldn't be looking like one of those crazy ass contraptions that Blake comes up with. Bar width in XC is going to be narrower than our downhill and enduro counterparts. Those guys might be running 780s, maybe even 800mm bars. In XC, you'll find anything from 700 to probably about 740. Now, this is because over the years, you know, bars have been getting wider, XC trails and things have been getting, you know, a bit rougher, a bit more technical, and bikes more capable. So a slightly wider bar does give you a better stability and control. However, you don't want these monstrously wide scaffold bars poking out, catching on all the tight technical sections, or on the start line when you're banging bars with everyone else. And it's also a little bit lighter, just keeping them a little bit narrower as well. when you're putting a new bar or changing the bar, or you get a new bike and are thinking how much to cut those bars down to, have a think about sort of how broad-shouldered you are. Now, we've all seen a classic example of, say, a kid's moving up, he's got his first adult bike, his parents have bought him, he's stoked, but he's got these huge, great adult bars and he's riding around the parks like this and it just looks like he's trying to turn a bus. It's blooming hard work. Try and sort of match your bars so they're obviously wider than your shoulders, but so you're not really outstretched, because it's really going to open you up and make things very difficult. It's going to throw your body weight further forwards again, not in a good way. Let's talk saddle height then. Now, whether you've got a fixed post or a dropper on your XC rig, put the pedal to the lowest position, so the 6 o'clock position. Make sure you've got the correct shoes that you'd wear all the time and pedal combo. Now you should see that you should have a slight bend in your leg. Your leg should never be locked out. If your leg's locked out, you're going to cause some very unwanted pressure on all your joints and it's going to be really hard to pedal properly. Not only that, you're going to rock from side to side as you extend each way on your hips, and your pelvis is just going to swing like that. And the worst thing is, it is going to give you some pressure where you really definitely don't want pressure. Male or female, pressure down there, it ain't no good. So yeah, get that saddle height. Definitely have a little play around. Just drop it up ever so slightly higher or lower, whatever needs to be. Play with it, but make sure you get it bang on. Now, once you've got that saddle height sorted, and remember, if you are running a dropper, make sure that thing is extended all the way. It's saddle tilt. Now, this refers to basically how high or low the nose or the rear of the saddle is. It's just sort of where it's tilting like this. It's really important to get this one sorted as well, because again, it can lead to a lot of uncomfortable pressure points, which when you're sitting on this thing all day, you definitely don't want that. If you find that you are getting some unwanted pressure points, maybe slightly further forward or further backwards, shall we say, then really adjust, tilt ever so slightly incrementally the front of the saddle down to relieve pressure at the front and vice versa at the rear. But again, it's something that's very minute adjustments that can make huge differences. And you can see a lot of seat posts underneath, they'll have these 2 screws here, so you can really just back them off and tighten them up to really fine tune that. Suspension in the Lycra-clad world, well, that's normally around 100mm travel, rear and up front. But on a hardtail, you may see about a 110 fork up front, maybe. Usually with some kind of lockout, be it a lever or button or switch on the fork. Heck, even the forks on my budget bike have got a little dial to lock them out. So it really is something you'll find quite commonplace. You'll always aim to use this lockout lever here at the beginning of the race, on the start, to get the most power down. The same with any big long climbs or long, smooth, straight pedally bits where you can really lock that out, stop the bike from bobbing up and down and making it more efficient. But if you're not using that lockout, how do you have your suspension set up on an XC bike? Let's start with tokens then. Now, normally on my downhill, my Enduro trail bikes, I would absolutely slam those things full of tokens to really get them to ramp up in their travel. From sort of mid-stroke onwards, be very, very firm and sit very high up in the travel. XC, that's not really going to work because you've only got a limited amount of travel. If you slam that full of tokens, you're going to get sort of 10, 20 mil, and then it's just going to be quite firm. So I actually run about 2 tokens in these forks, and a ever so slightly softer pressure to absorb all that small bump, but then just so it remains very linear through its travel as well. So it will ramp up towards the end for any of the bigger hits. Bear in mind they're fewer and further between an XC, but you've still got that nice plush feeling all the way through. So you're making good use of that limited travel. That goes for the rear as well. I don't go slamming spacers in that either because I want that to stay fairly active when it is being used. Remember, you've got that lockout lever, so you can, on any pedally bits, just click that button, lock that fork and shock out, and you're going to be flying along. Depending upon your weight and your riding style then, have a play around with the pressures that are in your forks and your shock. Like I said, you don't need to go banging that thing up to 6 billion PSI because you've got lockout levers which will lock that out firm for you. You want that suspension to still remain active and supple without just blowing through all the travel. So just play around, see what works, and just fine tune it that way. XC tyres, well, they're fragile little things. You can't go hammering them much like those Enduro and downhill tyres either, but like Enduro and sort of on the handlebar scene, they have been getting slightly bigger and wider as well, with 2.2 to sort of 2.4 almost being the norm these days. Those sort of 2.0, 1.9 tyres, they are long gone. Tyres have been getting wider and sturdier, and the construction that makes them up a lot better as well. XC-specific inserts have almost become normal practice and normal use as well, lightweight versions of their Enduro counterparts. Now, whilst these are very good and they'll stop you from damaging rims and getting pinch punctures, you've still got to be careful because XC tyres do have thin sidewalls, so you can still easily slice them open and damage them that way. But it does mean you can run sort of lower pressures and experiment that way, gaining possibly more grip. Now, the XC tyres I'll always aim to run something faster rolling out the back and something a bit chunkier up the front. Nothing too overkill, mind, but just something that's going to give me a little bit more grip and confidence in the turns, while still, when I'm sprinting or going up those climbs, is going to roll nice and quickly. Possibly slightly narrower on the back, like a 2.2, and then something a bit bigger on the front, like maybe a 2.3 or that 2.4, like I said. Pressures wise, when setting them up then, well, like I said, with the widths that I run, the 2.2 and then roughly the 2.3 or 4, I'm running 24 PSI out back and 22 up front. I don't run any inserts. I prefer to sort of pick my lines, ride properly and not need them rather than have them in there. Maybe if the courses were to get particularly rough and gnarly, then I might consider chucking one in the rear, but I don't. I find that pressure wise, like I said, I'm 6 foot, 80 kilos, and that's the same pressures actually I run on my full sus and my hardtail. Those pressures give me adequate grip and rolling speed. Play around with this, don't go too low, be careful because you are going to smash up sort of your lightweight wheels and your lightweight tyres. They don't take a lot of beating, so it's really something that you probably aren't going to go too low with. If you want that security, I'd probably chuck an insert in there. Last few little setup tips and tricks then. Let's start out the front, Garmin wise. Now, probably most of us are going to be using computers out there. I like to have mine mounted out in front as far as possible. That way it's easier to read when you're head down, real charging. You can look down at it nice and easily, see the numbers. A lot of us will work off of various stats, heart rate, power, etc. If you've got that mounted really far back on top of the stem here, or even on the stem itself, then you find yourself sort of looking down and it's a bit harder to read. So it just makes even just interpreting data, time, whatever, that little bit simpler and quicker, especially if it's bumpy and going rough. Bottles, if you're out for an epic or it's a big long race, I definitely recommend having your bike set up so that it can take 2 bottle cages if it'll fit. I've got one on mine at the moment, but if I go out for an all-dayer, I'll mount another one in there as well. That way you got at least a litre of water with you. Yeah, otherwise mudguard if it gets really muddy, but I mean that's probably recommended for any kind of mountain bike mud ride. And finally, you're probably wondering what this little bit of tape for here is. Well, if I do end up going for a big one, or say it's one of those epic races where you need to carry stuff with you, I actually strap stuff there, but I don't want my frame getting scratched and fouled up, so I've got some just electrical tape wrapped around it to stop it rubbing underneath there. That's it then, that's how to set up an XC bike and roughly how I'll have mine set up as well. Now, a big thanks to Cwmcarn Forest and Natural Resources Wales for letting us film here on this beautiful sunny day in Wales, but I'm off out of here for an XC spin, I think. Make the most of it. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Happy riding, and I will catch you next time. Toodles! I'm off! See you later, Louis! Toodles!